The Wrong Thing by Rudyard Kipling. Dan had gone in for building model boats, but after he had filled the schoolroom with chips which he expected Una to clear away, they turned him out of doors, and he took all his tools up the hill to Mr. Springett's yard, where he knew he could make as much mess as he chose. Old Mr. Springett was a builder contractor and sanitary engineer, and his yard, which opened off the village street, was always full of interesting things. At one end of it was a long loft reached by a ladder, where he kept his iron-bound scaffold planks, tins of paints, pulleys, and odds and ends he had found in old houses. He would sit here by the hour watching his carts as they loaded or unloaded in the yard below, while Dan gouged and grunted at the carpenter's bench near the loft window. Mr. Springett and Dan had always been particular friends, for Mr. Springett was so old he could remember when railways were being made in the southern counties of England, and people were allowed to drive dogs in carts. One hot still afternoon the tar paper on the roof smelt like ships. Dan, in his shirt sleeves, was smoothing down a new schooner's bow, and PG-58 Mr. Springett was talking of barns and houses he had built. He said he never forgot any stick or stone he had ever handled, or any man, woman, or child he had ever met. Just then, he was very proud of the village hall at the entrance to the village, which he had finished a few weeks before. "And I don't mind tellin' you," mused Dan, "he said that the hall will be my last job top of this mortal earth. I didn't make £10 nor yet 5 out o' the whole contract, but my name's lettered on the foundation stone, Ralph Springett, builder. And the stone she's bedded on 4-foot good concrete. If she shifts any time these 500 years, it'll surely turn in my grave. I told the Lunnon architect so when he come down to oversee my work." "What did he say?" Dan was sandpapering the schooner's port bow. "Nothing. The hall ain't more than one of his small jobs for him, but 'tain't small to me, and my name is cut and lettered front in the village street. I do hope and pray for time everlasting y'all want the little round file for that holler in her bow." "Who's there?" Mr. Springett turned stiffly in his chair. A long pile of scaffold planks ran down the centre of the loft. Dan looked and saw Hal of the Draft's touzled head beyond them. "3. Be you the builder of the village hall?" he asked of Mr. Springett. "I be," was the answer, "but if you want a job, PG-59. Hal laughed. "No faith," he said, "only the hall is as good and honest a piece of work as I've ever run a rule over. So being born hereabouts, and being reckoned a master among masons, and accepted as a master mason, I made bold to pay my brotherly respects to the builder." Mr. Springett looked important. "I be a bit rusty, but I'll try ye." He asked Hal several curious questions, and the answers must have pleased him, for he invited Hal to sit down. Hal moved up, always keeping behind the pile of planks so that only his head showed, and sat down on a trestle in the dark corner at the back of Mr. Springett's desk. He took no notice of Dan, but talked at once to Mr. Springett about bricks and cement and lead and glass, and after a while Dan went on with his work. He knew Mr. Springett was pleased, because he tugged his white sandy beard and smoked his pipe in short puffs. The two men seemed to agree about everything, but when grown-ups agree they interrupt each other, almost as much as if they were quarrelling. Hal said something about workmen. "Why, that's what I always say," Mr. Springett cried. "A man who can only do one thing, he's but next above full to the man that can't do nothing. That's where the unions make their mistake." "My thought to the very dot." Dan heard Hal slap his tight-hosed leg. "I've suffered in my time from these same guilds, unions, diu call 'em, all their precious talk of the PG-60 mysteries of their tradeswe. What does it come to?" "Nothin', you've just about hit it," said Mr. Springett, and rammed his hot tobacco with his thumb. "Take the art of woodcarving," Hal went on. He reached across the planks, grabbed a wooden mallet, and moved his other hand, as though he wanted something. Mr. Springett, without a word, passed him one of Dan's broad chisels. "Woodcarving, for example, if you can cut wood, and have a fair draught of what you mean to do, a heaven's name, take chisel and maul, and let drive at it, say I. Y'all soon find all the mystery, forsooth, of woodcarving under your proper hand." Whack came the mallet on the chisel, and a sliver of wood curled up in front of it. Mr. Springett watched like an old raven. "All art is one man on," said Hal between whacks, "and to wait on another man to finish out. To finish out your work ain't no sense," Mr. Springett cut. "That's what I'm always saying to the boy here." He nodded towards Dan. "That's what I said when I put the new wheel into Brewster's mill in 1872. I reckoned I was millwright enough for the job 'thout bringin' a man from Lunnon, and besides, dividin' work eats up profits no bounds." Hal laughed his beautiful deep laugh, and Mr. Springett joined in till Dan laughed too. "You handle your tools, I can see," said Mr. PG-61, Springett, I reckon if you're anyway like me you've found yourself hindered by those guilds. Did you call 'em unions, we say? You may say so. Hal pointed to a white scar on his cheekbone. This is a remembrance from the master watching foreman of masons on Magdalen Tower, because please you I dared to carve stone without their leave. They said a stone had slipped from the cornice by accident. I know them accidents, there's no way to disprove 'em, and stones ain't the only things that slip. Mr. Springett grunted. Hal went on. I've seen a scaffold plank keckle, and shoot a too clever workman 30 foot on to the cold chancel floor below, and a rope can break. Yes, natural as nature, and lime'll fly up in a man's eyes, without any breath o' wind, sometimes, said Mr. Springett, but who's to show 'twasn't a accident? Who do these things? Dan asked, and straightened his back at the bench, as he turned the schooner end forend in the vice to get at her counter. Them which don't wish other men to work no better, nor quicker than they do, growled Mr. Springett. Don't pinch her so hard in the vice muse. Dan put a piece o' rag in the jaws or you'll bruise her more than Thaith turned towards Hal. If a man has his private spite laid up against you, the unions give him his excuse for working it off. Well, I know it, said Hal. They never let you go, them spiteful ones. IPG 62. Knowed a plasterer in 1860 owned on. To the Wells he was a Frenchie, a bad enemy he was. I had mine too. He was an Italian called Benedetto. I met him first at Oxford on Magdalen Tower, when I was learning my trader trades. I should say a bad enemy he was, as you say. But he came to be my singular good friend, said Hal, as he put down the mallet, and settled himself comfortably. What might his trade have been? Plastering, Mr. Springett asked. Plastering of a sort. He worked in stucco fresco. We call it made pictures on plaster, not, but what he had a fine sweep of the hand in drawing. He'd take the long sides of a cloister trowel on his stuff, and roll out his great alabrod pictures of saints and crop it up trees quick as a Webster unrolling cloth. Almost Benedetto could draw, but it was a little-minded man professing to be full of secrets of colour or plaster common. Tricks all of him, and his one single talk was how Tom, Dick or Harry had stole this or t'other secret art from him. I know that sort, said Mr. Springett. There's no keeping peace or making peace with such an they're mostly born and bone idle. True, even his fellow countrymen laughed at his jealousy. We too came to loggerheads early on Magdalen Tower. I was a youngster then, maybe I spoke my mind about his work. You shouldn't never do that. Mr. Springett shook his head. That sort lay it up against you. PG 63. True enough, this Benedetto did most specially body o' me. The man lived to hate me, but I always kept my eyes open on a plank or a scaffold. I was mighty glad to be shut of him when he quarrelled with his guild foreman, and went off nose in air and paints under his arm. But Hal leaned forward. If you hate a man or a man hates you, I know you're everlastin' running across him. Mr. Springett interrupted. Excuse me, sir. He leaned out of the window and shouted to a carter who was loading a cart with bricks. Ain't you no more sense than to heap 'em up that way? He said. Take and throw 100 of 'em off. It's more than the team can compass. Throw 'em off, I tell you, and make another trip for what's left over. Excuse me, sir, you were saying? I was saying that before the end of the year, I went to Bury to strengthen the leadwork in the great Abbey east window there. Now that's just one of the things I've never done, but I mind there was a cheap excursion to Chichester in 1879, and I went and watched leading a wonderful fine window in Chichester Cathedral. I stayed watchin' till 'twas time for us to go back dunno, as I had 2 drinks p'raps all that day. Hal smiled at Bury. Then sure enough I met my enemy Benedetto. He had painted a picture in plaster on the south wall of the refectory, a noble place, for a noble finger picture of Jonah. PG 64. Our Jonah and his whale. I've never been as far as Bury. You've worked about a lot, said Mr. Springett with his eyes on the carter below. No, not the whale. This was a picture of Jonah and the Pompeian that withered. But all that Benedetto had shown was a peevish greybeard, huggled up in anglage drapery, beneath a Pompeian on a wooden trellis. This last being a dead thing, he'd drawn it as tweer to the life, but fierce old Jonah bared in the sun, angry even to death that his cold prophecy was disproven. Jonah ashamed, and already hearing the children of Nineveh running to mark him. That was what Benedetto had not drawn. He better ha' stuck to his whale, then, said Mr. Springett. He'd ha' done no better with that. He draws the damp cloth off the picture, and shows it to me. I was a craftsman too, dicey. 'Tis good, I said, but it goes no deeper than the plaster. What he said in a whisper. Be thy own judge, Benedetto, I answered. Does it go deeper than the plaster? He reeled against a piece of dry wall. No, he says, and I know it, I could not hate thee more than I have done these 5 years. But if I live I will try, Hal, I will try. Then he goes away. I pitied him, but I had spoken truth, his picture went no deeper than the plaster. Ah, said Mr. Springett, who had turned quite red, you was talkin' so fast, I didn't understand what you was driven at. I've seen PG 65 men, good workmen, they wastry, to do more than they could do, and they couldn't compass it, they knowed it, and it nigh broke their hearts like. You was in your right, o' course, sir, to say what you thought o' his work, but if y'all excuse me, was you in your duty? I was wrong to say it, Hal replied. God forgive me, I was young, he was workman enough himself to know where he failed, but it all came evens in the long run. By the same token, did ye ever hear o' one Torrigiano Torrisini, we called him? I can't say I ever. Roman 999, was he a Frenchy like? No, a hectoring, hard-mouthed, long-sworded Italian builder, as vain as a peacock, and as strong as a bull, but mark you, a master workman, more than Thaith could get his best work out of the worst men. Which it's a gift I had a foreman bricklayer like him, once, said Mr. Springett. He used to prod 'em in the back like with a pointing trowel, and they did wonders. I've seen our Torrisini lay a prentice down with one buffet, and raise him with another to make a mason of him. I worked under him at building a chapel in Londona Chapel, and a tomb for the king. I never knew kings went to chapel much, said Mr. Springett, but I always hold with a man don't care who he be seein' about his own grave before he dies. Tidn't the sort of thing to leave to your family. After the will's read, I reckon 'twas. A fine vault, PG 66. None finer in England. This Torrigiano had the contract for it, as you'd say. He picked master craftsmen from all parts, England, France, Italy. The Low Countries no odds to him so long as they knew their work, and he drove them like pigs at Brightling Fair. He called us English all pigs. We suffered it, because he was a master in his craft. If he misliked any work that a man had done with his own great hands, he'd rive it out, and tear it down before us all. Are you pig, you English pig, he'd scream in the dumb wretch's face. You answer me, you look at me, you think at me, come out with me into the cloisters, I will teach you carving myself, I will gild you all over. But when his passion had blown out, he'd slip his arm round the man's neck, and impart knowledge worth gold. 'Twould have done your heart good, mused Springett, to see the 200 of us masons, jewellers, carvers, gilders, iron workers, and the rest all toiling like carkangels, and this mad Italian hornet, fleeing from one to next up, and down the chapel. Done your heart good, it would. I believe you, said Mr. Springett, in 1854, I mind the railway was bane made into Hastings, there was 2,000 navvies on it all young strongen, I was one of 'em. Oh dearie me, excuse me, sir, but was your enemy workin' with you? Benedetto, be sure he was. He followed me like a lover. He painted pictures on the chapel ceiling slung from a chair. Torrigiano, PG 67, made us promise not to fight till the work should be finished. We were both master craftsmen, do ye see, and he needed us none the less. I never went aloft to carve thout testing all my ropes and knots each morning. We were never far from each other. Benedetto 'ud sharpen his knife on his sole while he waited for his plaster to dry. Wheat, id hear it where I hung chipping round a pillar head, and we'd nod to each other friendly like. Oh, he was a craftsman, was Benedetto, but his hate spoiled his eye, and his hand. I mind the night I had finished the models for the bronze saints round the tomb, Torrigiano embraced me before all the chapel, and bade me to supper. I met Benedetto. When I came out he was slavering in the porch like a mad dog, working himself up to it, said Mr. Springett. Did he have it in at ye that night? No, that time he kept his oath to Torrigiano, but I pitied him well. Now I come to my own follies. I had never thought too little of myself, but after Torrisini had put his arm round my neck, it Hal broke into a laugh. I lay, there was not much odds twixt me and a cocksparrow in his pride. I was pretty middlin' young once on a time, said Mr. Springett. Then you know that a man can't drink and dice and dress fine and keep company above his station, but his work suffers for it, mused Springett. I never held much with dressin' up beautier, right, the worst mistakes I ever made. PG 68. They was made on a Monday morning, Mr. Springett answered. We've all been one sort of fool or t'other, mused Dan. Dan take the smallest gouge or yowl be spluttin' her stern works clean out can't. Ye see the grain of the wood don't favour a chisel. I'll spare you some of my follies, but there was a man called Brigandine, Bob Brigandine, clerk of the king's ships, a little smooth bustling atomy, as clever as a woman to get work done for nothin', a wonderful smooth-tongued pleader. He made much o' me, and asked me to draft him out a drawing, a piece of carved and gilt scrollwork, for the bows of one of the king's ships. The Sovereign was her name. Was she a man of war? Asked Dan. She was a warship, and a woman called Catherine of Castile desired the king to give her the ship for a pleasure ship of her own. I did not know at the time, but she'd been at Bob to get this scrollwork done, and fitted that the king might see it, I made him the picture in an hour all of a heat, after superan great heaving play of dolphins, and a Neptune or so raining in webber-footed seahorses, and Arion with his harp high atop of them. It was 23 foot long, and maybe 9 foot diapainted, and gilt. It must ha just about looked fine, said Mr. Springett. That's the curiosity of it, 'twas bad rank bad in my conceit. I must needs show it to Torrigiano in the chapel. He straddles his legs, hunches his knife behind him, and whistles like PG 69. A stormcock through a sleecher. Benedetto was behind him. He were never far apart, I've told you. That is pig's work, says our master. Swine's work. You make any more such things even after your fine court suppers, and you shall be sent away. Benedetto licks his lips like a cat. Is it so bad then, master? He says, what a pity. Yes, says Torrigiano, scarcely. You could do things so bad I will condescend to show. He talks to me then, and there no shouting, no swearing, it was too bad for that, but good memorable counsel bitten in slowly then. He sets me to draft out a pair of iron gates to take, as he said, the taste of my naughty dolphins out of my mouth, iron's sweet stuff if you don't torture her, and hammered work is all pure truthful line, with a reason and a support for every curve and bar of it. A week at that settled my stomach handsomely, and the master let me put the work through the smithy, where I sweated out more of my foolish pride. Good stuff is good iron, said Mr. Springett. I done a pair of large gates once in 1863. Oh, I forgot to say that Bob Brigandine whipped away my draft of the ship's scrollwork, and would not give it back to me to redraw. He said 'twould do well enough, howsoever my lawful work kept me too busy to remember him body o' me. But I worked that winter upon PG 70 the gates, and the bronzes for the tomb as I'd never worked before. I was leaner than a lath, but I lived then. Hal looked at Mr. Springett with his wise crinkled up eyes, and the old man smiled back. Ouch, Dan cried. He had been hollowing out the schooner's afterdeck. The little gouge had slipped, and gashed the ball of his left thumb, an ugly triangular tear. That came of not steadying your wrist, said Hal calmly. Don't bleed over the wood, do your work with your heart's blood, but no need to let it show. He rose, and peered into a corner of the loft. Mr. Springett had risen too, and swept down a ball of cobwebs from a rafter. Clap that on, was all he said, and put your handkerchief atop. 'Twill cake over in a minute, it don't hurt now, do it? No, said Dan indignantly, you know it has happened lots of times. I'll tie it up myself, go on, sir. And it'll happen hundreds of times more, said Hal with a friendly nod, as he sat down again, but he did not go on till Dan's hand was tied up properly. Then he said, one dark December day, too dark to judge colour, was all sitting and talking round the fires in the chapel. You heard good talk there, when Bob Brigandine bustles in, and Hal, you're sent for, he squeals. I was at Torrigiano's feet on a pile of putlocks, as I might be here toasting a herring on my knife's point. 'Twas PG 71, the one English thing our master liked, salt herring. I am busy about my art, I calls. Art, says Bob, what's art compared to your scrollwork for the sovereign? Come. Be sure your sins will find you out, says Torrigiano. Go with him, and see. As I followed Bob out, I was aware of Benedetto like a black spot, when the eyes are tired, slithering up behind me. Bob hurries through the streets in the raw fog, slips into a doorway upstairs along passages, and at last thrusts me into a little cold room vilely hung with Flemish tapestries, and no furnishing except a table and my draft of the sovereign's scrollwork. Here he leaves me. Presently comes in a dark long-nosed man in a fur cap. Master Harry Daw, said he. The same, I says. Where a plague has Bob Brigandine gone? His thin eyebrows surged up a piece and come down again in a stiff bar. He went to the king, he says. All one, what's your pleasure with me? I says, shivering, for it was mortal cold. He lays his hand flat on my draft. Master Daw, he says, do you know the present price of gold leaf for all this wicked gilding of yours? By that I guessed he was some cheese-paring clerk or other of the king's ships, so I gave him PG 72, the price I forget it now, but it worked out to £30 scarved gilt, and fitted in place. £30, he said, as though I had pulled a tooth of him. You talk as though £30 was to be had for the asking. None the less, he says. Your draft's a fine piece of work. I'd been looking at it ever since I came in, and 'twas viler even than I judged it at first. My eye and hand had been purified the past months, do you see, by my iron work. I could do it better now, I said. The more I studied my squabby Neptunes, the less I liked and Arion was a pure flaming shame atop of the unbalanced dolphins. I doubt it will be fresh expense to draft it again, he says. Bob never paid me for the first draft, I lay hell, never pay me for the second twill, cost the king nothing if I redraw it, I says. There's a woman wishes it to be done quickly, he says. Well, stick to your first drawing, muse Daw, but £30 is £30, you must make it less. And all the while the faults in my draft fair leaped out and hit me between the eyes at any cost. I thinks to myself, I must get it back and redraft it. He grunts at me impatiently, and a splendid thought comes to me which shall save me by the same token 'twas quite honest. They ain't always, said Mr. Springett, how did you get out of it? By the truth, I says to Master Fur Cap, as PG 73, I might to you here, I says, I'll tell you something, since you seem a knowledgeable man. Is the sovereign to lie in Thames River all her days, or will she take the high seas? Oh, he says quickly, the king keeps no cats that don't catch mice, she must sail the seas, Master Daw shall be hired to merchants for the trade, shall be out in all shapes o' weathers. Does that make any odds? Why then, says I, the first heavy sea she sticks her nose into LL claw off half that scroll work, and the next will finish it. If she's meant for a pleasure ship, give me my draft again, and I'll porture you a pretty light piece of scrollwork good cheap. If she's meant for the open sea, pitch the draft into the fire, she can never carry that weight on her bows. He looks at me squintlings and plucks his underlip. Is this your honest, unswayed opinion, he says. Body o' me ask about, I says, any seaman could tell you 'tis true I am advising you against my own profit, but why I do so is my own concern. Not altogether, he says, it's some of mine. You've saved me £30, Master Daw, and you've given me good arguments to use against a wilful woman that wants my fine new ship for her own toy. Well, not have any scrollwork, his face shined with pure joy. Then see that the £30 you've saved on it are honestly paid the king, I says, PG 74, and keep clear o' womenfolk. I gathered up my draft and crumpled it under my arm. If that's all you need of me, I'll be gone, I says, for I'm pressed. He turns him round and fumbles in a corner too, pressed to be made a knight, Sir Harry, he says, and comes at me smiling with 3/4 of a rusty sword. I pledge you my mark, I never guessed it was the king, till that moment I kneeled, and he tapped me on the shoulder. Rise up, Sir Harry Daw, he says, and in the same breath I'm pressed too, and slips through the tapestries, leaving me like a stuck calf. It come over me in a bitter wave like that here was I a master craftsman who had worked no bounds soul or body to make the king's tomb, and chapel a triumph, and a glory for all time, and here diocese. I was made knight not for anything I'd slaved over or given my heart and guts to, but expressedly because I'd say him £30 and a tongue lashing from Catherine of Castilish, that had asked for the ship that thought shrivelled me with insides, while I was folding away my draft on the heels of it maybe you'll see, why I began to grin to myself. I thought of the earnest simplicity of the man the king, I should say, because I'd saved him the money, his smile as though he'd won half France. I thought of my own silly pride and foolish expectations that some day he'd honour me as a master craftsman. I thought of the PG 75 broken-tipped sword he'd found behind the hangings, the dirt of the cold room, and his cold eye wrapped up in his own, concerns scarcely resting on me. Then I remembered the solemn chapel roof, and the bronzes about the stately tomb he'd lie in, and I see the unreason of it, all the mad high humour of it, all took hold on me, till I sat me down on a dark stairhead in a passage and laughed, till I could laugh no more. What else could I have done? I never heard his feet behind me, always walked like a catbutt. His arms slid round my neck, pulling me back where I sat till my head lay on his chest, and his left hand held the knife plumb over my heart. Benedetto. Even so I laughed, the fit was beyond my holding. Laughed, while he ground his teeth in my ear. He was stark crazed for the time. Laugh, he said, finish the laughter, I'll not cut ye short, tell me no. Wrenched at my head, the king chose to honour yow, you lickspittle Englishman. I am full of patience, now I have waited so long. Then he was off at score about his Jonah in Bury refectory, and what I'd said of it, and his pictures in the chapel which all men praised, and none looked at twice, as if that was my fault, and a whole parcel of words and looks treasured up against me through years. Ease off your arm a little, I said, I cannot die by choking, for I am just dubbed Knight Benedett. Tell me, and I'll confess ye, Sir Harry, PG 76, Daw Knight, there's a long night before ye tell, says he. So I told him his chin on my crown, told him, all told it as well, and with as many words as I have ever told a tale at a supper with Torrigiano. I knew Benedetto would understand, for mad or sad he was a craftsman. I believed it to be the last tale I'd ever tell top of mortal earth, and I would not put out bad work before I left the lodge. All art's one art. As I said, I bore Benedetto no malice, my spirits, do you see, were catched up in a high solemn exaltation, and I saw all earth's vanities foreshortened and little laid out below me like a town from a cathedral scaffolding. I told him what befell and what I thought of it. I gave him the king's very voice at Master door. You've saved me £30, his peevish grunt, while he looked for the sword, and how the badgeried figures of glory and victory leered at me from the Flemish hanging's body. Oh me, 'twas a fine noble tale, and as I thought my last work on earth. That is how I was honoured by the king. I said, "They'll hang ye for killing me, Benedetto, and since you've killed in the king's palace they'll draw and quarter you, but you're too mad to care grant me, though ye never heard a better tale." He said nothing, but I felt him shake my head on his chest, shook his right arm, fell away, his left dropped the knife, and he leaned with both hands on my shoulder, shaking. I turned me round, no need to put my foot on PG-77 his knife. The man was speechless with laughter, honest craftsman's mirth, the first time I'd ever seen him laugh, you know, the mirth that cuts off the very breath, while ye stamp and snatch at the short ribs. That was Benedetto's case. When he began to roar and bay and whoop in the passage, I hailed him out into the street, and there we leaned against the wall, and had it all over again, waving our hands and wagging our heads still. The watch came to know if we were drunk. Benedetto says to M. Solemn, "As an owl you have saved me £30, mused Dor," and off he peeled. In some sort we were mad drunk, I because dear life had been given back to me, and he because, as he said afterwards, because the old crust of hatred round his heart was broke up and carried away by laughter. His very face had changed too. "Hal," he cries, "I forgive thee, forgive me, too, Hal. Oh, you English, did it gall thee, Hal, to see the rust on the dirty sword? Tell me again, Hal." How the king grunted with joy. "Oh, let us tell the master." So we reeled back to the chapel, arms round each other's necks, and when we could speak thought we'd been fighting, we told the master. Yes, we told Torrigiano, and he laughed till he rolled on the new cold pavement. Then he knocked our heads together. "Are you English?" he cried. "You are more than pigs, you are English now, you are PG-78, well punished for your dirty fishes. Put the draft in the fire, and never do so any more. You are a fool, Hal, and you are a fool, Benedetto, but I need your works to please this beautiful English king." "And I meant to kill Hal," says Benedetto. "Master, I meant to kill him, because the English king had made him a knight." "Ah," says the master, shaking his finger, "Benedetto, if you had killed my Hal, I should have killed you in the cloister, but you are a craftsman too, so I should have killed you like a craftsman, very, very slowly, in an hour, if I could spare the time that was Torrigiano, master." Mr. Springett sat quite still for some time after Hal had finished, then he turned dark red, then he rocked to and fro, then he coughed and wheezed till the tears ran down his face. Dan knew by this that he was laughing, but it surprised Hal at first. "Excuse me, sir," said Mr. Springett, "but I was thinking of some stables I built for a gentleman in 1874. They were stables in blue brick, very particular work. Dunno, as they weren't the best job which ever I'd done, but the gentleman's ladished come from Lunnon, new marriage was all for building what she called a hoha, what you and me 'ud call a dickrite, across his park, a middlin' big job which I'd have had the contract of, for she spoke to me in the library about it. But I told her there was a line o' springs just PG-79, where she wanted to dig her ditch, and shed flood the park if she went on." "Were there any springs at all?" said Hal. "Bound to be springs everywhere if you dig deep enough, ain't there? But what I said about the springs put her out o' conceit o' diggin' haw-haws, and she took and built a white tile dairy instead. But when I sent in my last bill for the stables, the gentleman he paid it 'thout even looking at it, and I hadn't forgot nothin', I do assure you, more than that he slips 2 £5 notes into my hand in the library, and Ralph, he saysh allers called me by name Ralph, he says, 'You've saved me a heap of expense and trouble this autumn.' I didn't say nothin', o' course I knowed he didn't want any haw-haws digged across his park no more'n I did. But I never said nothing no more. He didn't say nothing about my blue brick stables, which was really the best and honestest piece o' work I'd done in quite a while. He give me £10 for savin' him, hem of a deal o' trouble at home. I reckon things are pretty much alike all times in all places." Hal and he laughed together. Dan couldn't quite understand what they thought so funny, and went on with his work for some time without speaking. When he looked up, Mr. Springett alone was wiping his eyes with his green and yellow pocket handkerchief. "Bless me," mused Dan, "I've been asleep," he said, "and I've dreamed a dream which has PG-80 made me laugh, as I ain't laughed in a long day. I can't remember what 'twas all about, but they do say that when old men take to laughin' in their sleep, they're a middlin' ripe for the next world. Have you been workin' honest?" mused Dan. "Rather," said Dan, unclamping the schooner from the vice, "and look how I've cut myself with the small gouge." Yees, you want a lump o' cobwebs to that, said Mr. Springett. Oh, I see you've put it on already, that's right, mused Dan. PG 81.